I feel like
McNeely, and I'm interviewing Cassandra Clare, who wrote the Mortal Instruments series and the Infernal Devices series. So, where did you get your inspiration to write both the Mortal Instruments and the Infernal Devices?
I've always been a big lover of fantasy and fantasy novels, especially contemporary fantasy that's kind of set in our world where there's a secret world of magic that most people don't see. And I was with a friend of mine who is a tattoo artist, and she had brought me down to the tattoo shop where she worked, and she was showing me the designs that she worked on, which were these very black and white kind of stark graphics. And I told her that they looked like a language, and she said that it was a runic language, and that in ancient times warriors had, painted these symbols on their bodies to protect them in battle from blood loss, from, to make them more brave, make them harder to kill. And I was sort of caught up by the idea because I thought, well, what if, there were actually a race of people for whom this worked, that, they were a magical race of people, and that they had refined these tattoos over many years so that they could actually protect themselves in battle, and it would obviously have to be a magical sort of battle against a magical foe. And so over the next 6 months I developed the idea of this being a race of demon hunters called shadow hunters, and that they fought the dark forces, and I developed those characters of Clary and Jace, and it kind of came from there.
That's cool. So what aspects of the characters in the Mortal Instruments made you want to write about the people who came before them and their ancestors?
I think that it really was one of those things that sort of comes from an image in your head. I was in London, and I was crossing Blackfriars Bridge, which is, if you've read the Clockwork series, and an important location. And it was a very misty day, and I was kind of looking around, and I was thinking, about how it must look a lot like it had 150 years ago when the bridge was first built. And I had this image in my head of a boy and a girl in sort of period costume from the Victorian era, kind of standing and looking out over the water, and then from behind them, without them being able to see it, was coming this very silent army of, automaton creatures that were really creepy, and it really creeped me out. It was one of those things, like if you're lying in bed and you suddenly think, what if there's someone in the closet? And I was really freaked out by the whole concept, and I kind of went back to my hotel, and I started kind of jotting down some notes, and I thought, how does this fit into the shadow hunter world? And then I thought, well, they're very prepared for fighting, all of the foes that they know well, fairies, warlocks, demons, vampires, but the idea of an army of automatons would be something that they had never dealt with before, and wouldn't know how to face. And the Victorian era was so much about that kind of mechanical technology just coming onto the scene that it gave me the immediate thought of, what about writing about shadow hunters, and they have to face these machines in a world where they've never had to actually deal with machines before. And I immediately knew that I wanted it to be about the ancestors of the kids in the Mortal Instruments, just so that I could have fun kind of tying the two families together.
So how do you develop the personalities for the different characters and put a name to each of the characters that you develop?
Naming characters is fun. Some characters kind of come complete with names. They just pop into your head, and they're like, hi, I'm Tessa. Tessa kind of came with her name. Will came with his name. Jem was a little more difficult, but it was the suggestion of a friend of mine. Then a lot of times with characters, I have a really great baby name book that my friend Holly Black gave me, that is a list of all the different, it doesn't have baby names by alphabet, which is what's normal. It actually has them by feeling, the feeling you get when you hear the name. So there's names that make you feel adventurous, names that seem smart, names that seem, classical, and there's my favorite, which is names that seem evil. Because I always think, who is the person who goes in there thinking, well, I want to name my baby, Venthromax, I'm this is some strange people. But even if you don't use that exact name, it'll often give you an idea, and you kind of riff off that idea to get a name. So I use those, and I write down interesting names that I come across in real life. So, I do a lot of signings, and, I often find people who have really interesting names, so definitely some names have come from signings that I've done, where I've run across names that I have never seen before. Amatis, who was Luke's sister, was somebody that I signed a book for, and I was just like, what a pretty name, you know, like, you know, and she said it was Latin, and I was like, mind if I use it? She's like, no, go crazy. So I was happy about that. And then as for developing characters, you know, they sort of develop themselves over time. Like you sort of kind of start with a general idea of that character, and as you go on, they tend to refine themselves and become more and more themselves. You kind of feel like you're like uncovering secrets about them until you know them really well.
So how did you draw from your travels in Europe to write the Infernal Devices?
I think having traveled so much partly gave me the feeling that I really wanted to make sure that the shadow hunters were all over the world, that there weren't just shadow hunters in, you know, I always watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I thought, like, well, it's great that Buffy is in Sunnydale, but, like, what about the rest of the world? Like, what about the vampires what about, like, the people of, like, you know, Russia? Like, how are they protecting themselves against vampires? And she was dealing very locally with a problem that was clearly, like, a global problem. So I thought, well, I want to make sure there are shadow hunters in Asia, there are shadow hunters in Africa, there are shadow hunters in the Middle East, there are shadow hunters in Japan, there are shadow hunters in America. And so I think that a lot of that came from having traveled so much. And, you know, having sort of seen the world from a perspective in which often, like, you know, America is such a big country, you can spend your whole life here and never really think about leaving. And then when you do leave, you realize, you know, we're just one small part of a very big world. And so I think that was definitely a part of it.
How did switching from journalism to YA fiction change how you wrote your stuff?
It was a big change. It was definitely a big change. I think I partly got involved in journalism just because I thought, you know, that, I think the way a lot of people do that writing a book was such a difficult proposition, because once you wrote it, like, how did you get it published? You know, what do you do? What's the next step? And I had no idea. And I just thought it just seems impossible. You know, like, there's these books, and I love them, but I have no idea how they become, like, books out in the world that somebody has written. So I thought journalism school and journalism seemed easier. I just knew I wanted to work with words. And so I did do entertainment journalism for about 5 years. And then I just realized I wasn't happy. Like, it wasn't what I wanted to do. Even though it was fun, and there were definitely aspects of it that were great, I was just like, I don't really want to write about Brangelina forever. You know, I mean, I love, you know, love movies, love entertainment, but it wasn't making me happy. And what was making me happy was I had a part-time job at a bookstore in LA that catered just to kids and teens, and I would take the books home and I would read them, and I felt like I was rediscovering, like, the joy of reading, like, all these wonderful, like, YA books. The Philip Pullman books were just coming out at that time, the Golden Compass books, the Harry Potter books were coming out. It was definitely kind of like a renaissance time in YA lit, and I was realizing, like, you know, that was the thing that made me happy. And so I thought, well, why don't I just try to do, you know, like, this is the thing that makes me happy, and I should try to do it. So I would, you know, while I was at work, and I was supposed to be, like, you know, doing my journalism, I would be, like, writing City of Bones.
That's cool.
Probably not for the people that I worked for. But they never found out.
That's okay. So when can we expect the next installment of the Mortal Instruments series?
The next installment is called City of Lost Souls, and it's coming out in May 8th of next year. And then we are working on, we have a special project that I'm working on that I'm not allowed to talk about, but we're trying to figure out how to schedule the next Clockwork Princess, the special project, and the last of the Mortal Instruments books, which is City of Heavenly Fire. So hopefully those will all come out in the next, like, kind of year and a half after City of Lost Souls, and then I'll have kind of wrapped up the stories.
Wow, that's a lot of work in a year and a half.
I know. I think I'm going to take a year off after that and just, like, lie in a hammock and do nothing.
That's okay.
I think it'll be great.
So, Cassandra Clare, and that was my interview.